Good evening. I would like to call the September 16th, 2024 School Board Work Session to order. The time is now 5:34. The school board would like to take a moment to respectfully acknowledge that we are residing on the traditional land of the Dene people. Our mission is to provide an excellent and equitable education in a safe, supportive environment so that all students will succeed and contribute to a diverse and changing society. Ms. Richardson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Burgess,
Here.
Mrs. Burnett,
Here.
Mr. Doran,
Here.
Miss Maple is expected, Miss Marati,
Here.
Mrs. Sanderson. Here. Mrs. Hardy.
Here.
Thank you. The board has a quorum.
At this point, I will turn it over to the administration for our policy work.
Thank you, President Hardy. We have on your agenda Articles 2 and Article 3. The goal is to look at Article 2 tonight. We already looked at Article 3 in the spring. We just wanted to make sure that you had it in hand again, because we're hoping to put that on the agenda for first reading and second reading come, not tomorrow, but the next board meeting. So it's coming up soon for first reading and second reading. So if you have time to look through that, if you have any suggestions, you can certainly email those to us and we can work on making any edits that you might want before we get it to that first reading if possible. So we have that on the agenda, but the goal, unless we have time, I guess, is not to go through that again tonight. Article 2.
And unless there's already board member questions or edits that we would like to work through again, because as Ms. Dillard stated, it has been work session once, but if there's some further edits that we want to work on tonight would be a good night to do that.
Mr. Doran?
I would be supportive of that. I think there are a number of things. One thing that I'm trying to just figure if, as we make edits go in, but we don't know what edits have gone in. And so as we move forward, I think we ran into this a little bit on the last two articles that we acted on the board recently. So, you know, if we can in some way figure out how do we highlight what those edits are so we know, yes, it went in or it didn't go in, or, you know, because there are different ones that are coming and you're trying to, and you do a great job. I think we need to say that you do a great job in capturing and also working to check back, did I capture this right, and stuff like that. But
Yes, that's a great suggestion, and I can definitely do that. I'll just highlight, if I get, you know, individual emails, I'll make sure to highlight those changes, so absolutely. So we'll start with Article 2. It's a nice short article. It's administration, so it aligns with our Chapter 3, which is general school administration. Similar to what we did with previous articles, we highlighted specific policies that we thought would be of greater discussion. But instead of having two separate documents, one for discussion, one just for your information, since it's such a short article, we have it all in one. And we put the priority ones on top. So that's why you might look through and see that the numbering is off. So that's why that is. I will make edits as we're talking, and so I have it up on the screen. You can see what I'm doing, and we can start with Board Policy 2000, Concepts and Roles.
Still seeing a few people reading if we need time. We'll do Miss Burnett, then Mr. Doran. I saw he was.
Thank you. So in this one, 3 paragraphs in, where it starts, the superintendent shall develop decision-making processes. So actually, it's the last sentence here. The administration shall provide professional advice to the school board and to citizen advisory committees. We do not have citizen advisory committees. And so, I would just like to take that out, so it would end with school board.
Question following up on that. You have administrative committees, right?
We do, and maybe we should include something about board committees. I'm not sure if that's what it's getting at. And then I remember the last time we reviewed this, I preferred the term guidance rather than advice. And I don't know if that would be agreeable to the board.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
I would agree to that, having something maybe about our board committee, since we do have that. Yeah, I agree with that.
Maybe still on that same topic, if we did board and you call them administrative committees, or you call them, yeah, and administrative committees, so it covers all of it. Then Mr. Doran.
Okay, that'd be fine. I was just going to suggest that we cut out the word citizen. It's just any advisory committees, that whoever sets them up there.
Sounds good.
I would just say that we do have a policy in Article 1 that's called Citizen Advisory Committees, and that is our community relations article. And that's the heading of the policy, but then in that policy, we discuss board committees briefly, referencing what's in Article 9, ad hoc committees and administrative advisory committees. So all of those kind of fall under that citizen advisory committee. So if we don't like that language, maybe we want to think about changing the name of that policy too.
Mr. Doran.
If we just say advisory committees here, it includes that, and the cross-reference is there to also look at the citizen advisory section. So I think for simplicity, I would suggest just cut out citizen, and it covers whatever you call an advisory committee, whatever that grouping is, it's covered.
Mr. Doran, did you have something
Yeah,
beyond that?
I had
Mr.
something
Doran.
extra. Okay, it's more just a question and an understanding. The very last sentence on the page, the superintendent must approve all handbooks. And I'm sorry, it's my principal mind going, how picky are we going to be?
Not very picky, and that's actually a little bit looser than what our current policy is. I think our current policy reads must approve all handbooks prior to distribution or something. And so I was trying to loosen it up a little bit, and we work collaboratively on the handbook process, and if there were major changes, those major changes would come in the form of policy, which would then go back down through handbooks. So
If I might suggest and follow up with it,
Go ahead.
is maybe subject to approval or in coordination and with type of, my thing is, yes, the superintendent should, or assistants, whatever, should be there so that principals don't put something out that is erroneous or, counter position to district policy, et cetera, but I'm just trying to think what, I understand that it's collaboration, and that's what I experienced. So, but this really implies that you have to get the approval, whether it says prior to or not. And
Yeah, I like your recommendation of subject to the approval and working with that language. Yeah.
Follow up to that, should it be just superintendent or should it be superintendent or designee?
I think we moved away from the or designee language and just assumed that it is. And I think that's what we're trying to do as we clean up policy, just say superintendent with the expectation that a lot of things are delegated down through.
Remember the conversation, but I wasn't remembering where we landed.
To that point, if I could, I have those notations under Article 3 where throughout the article it's saying or designee, and actually in 2000, says, I have to find the specific line here, but it says that the superintendent can delegate, so we don't need a designee elsewhere in it, so.
I remember a conversation about all of that for a while. Ms. Burnett.
Sorry, I just wanted to go back for a second. Dr. Minor had brought up changing in that third paragraph, advice to guidance, and I didn't know if we had changed that or not. Oh, we did. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Was there any further edits for this article? I'm not seeing anybody, so I'm thinking we're moving on to 2120, Superintendent of Schools. Okay, Mr. Doran?
Want to thank Diana for catching or explaining the numbering. That was one of my first questions on this one when I found 2100 later on in the packet. So thank you for that. I also just wanted to note in paragraph 2, this is actually where we say that the superintendent can delegate any duties. My question on this is also paragraph 2, and then I'll get back in the queue if I can, is the last sentence,
Fine. We all had the same question. Continue.
you do,
Ms. Moore.
okay. So, I've got an annually identify, and we've got the emergency times, and we have times when superintendent is out of town. Typically, it goes to one of the assistant superintendents. one of them is out of town, might be the one designated, but, we change around some.
Yeah, I think that's existing AASB language, and that one sticks out to me as well, that I don't know that I've got my finger on what it should be changed to, but I think it's problematic also because the board retains authority to like appoint an acting superintendent if there is an emergency where I'm incapacitated. And so I'll have to think about how, I don't know that we even need that sentence, honestly, I think is because we know that powers are going to be delegated down through assistant superintendents. And if it's something that's more longer in nature, the board would take action at that point in time.
And for my follow-up, actually, my notation was, is it necessary? And I was thinking, just cut it out. And
Mr. Doran?
Paragraph 3 may be more of a question for consideration. Again, the last phrase, and actively seek out supplemental funding sources for the district. Basically, I would get rid of it, that phrasing. My concern is the main piece is that the superintendent oversees all financial operations. Saying that the superintendent is also going to do other supplemental actively doing that, does it become a distraction from their workload? Does that mean they go get grants or they go, get bills passed? It just seems to be extraneous and perhaps inappropriate there. And later on, we do talk about grants and such that the district is doing, but it's not the superintendent. They just oversee all of that, but they don't have to go out.
Yeah, I would concur with those statements. I know we changed it from AASB's language to try to even narrow it down because I can't remember exactly what their language was, but it was almost seeking out supplemental funding to help with the general fund. And it was like, whoa, that goes really far. So I would be in favor of striking that language as well.
Yeah, the ASB language says, shall oversee all financial operations of the district and actively seek out new funding sources for the school. So I think we put in supplemental as opposed to just funding sources, but we can take it out.
Seems like it might apply more to rural districts where they're doing more as a superintendent in the financial. Are there any further edits for this article? So moving on to the next one. Ms. Burnett, then Mr. Doran.
Thank you. So with this one, and I could be wrong, but I specifically remember I don't think it was last year, I think it was the year before, where we did something about the superintendent contract and we had put like specific time constraints on it, like we had to notify them by January. like for some reason that sticks in my head. I guess my question to this is, would we want to take the third paragraph here and make that more specific to, we need to notify the superintendent by January instead of just shall notify the superintendents of its intention early enough? I guess is where I'm at. Do we need to specifically put a date in there?
I think that's a good memory. That's specific to this superintendent's contract. And so if the board wants to go with that level of granularity for future boards to set a date, you certainly could, or you could leave it open enough where when you negotiate superintendent contracts that you could set specific dates. So there is a specific date in my current contract, but it wasn't set out through board policy.
That's where I'm getting it from. Can I actually refer to a different board member and ask that question, Mr. Doran? And other superintendent, have you ever specifically put a timeline, or what would you recommend here? I just know you've had the most experience with this.
It's been in their contract predominantly, yeah. And I would say it's best not in policy because circumstances may change. And similar to the contracts with, let's say with principals, we've moved up the dates and notifications for different things, and we can adjust those notices in contract. But we have certainly the reminder of this. And it does, since this does refer to the contract, we're protected. We have that specific. And it also doesn't preclude that there may be reason to give notice earlier. And certainly that's on either side. So
Thank you.
generally, I've seen it more general.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Doran?
I was going to suggest we delete the phrase in the first sentence to serve as its chief school administrator. One, to avoid confusion, that there is a designation as chief school administrator under state law, typically a non-certified person. And this is the contract, and so just going shall employ a superintendent for a contract term of no more than 3 years makes sense, and there's no confusion there. And if we would have again that we're hiring a chief school administrator, we can do that. That's still under the broad reference of superintendent.
I think that's wise because in 2120, you state that the superintendent shall have or acquire the required state certification. So if you didn't change that, it could be in conflict with the other policy.
Mr. Burgess?
Yeah, I just agree when I want to, excuse me, and I wanted to point out that in 2120, the first sentence defines what the superintendent is, so we don't need to repeat it in 2121, and it's conflicting language, so I agree with the omission.
Anything further on this article? Go ahead.
Curious if the board wants any kind of intent language from the superintendent, if I guess they're foreseeing not wanting to fulfill their contract. A lot of that is spelled out in the contract itself, but for paragraph 3, it states, the school board shall notify the superintendent of its intention not to renew the contract, but didn't know if you wanted any language in there, if you wanted information from the superintendent as soon as possible if they thought that they were not going to fulfill their contract or some of the years left on the contract.
Ms. Burnett?
I would actually agree with that. I know that it's stated in the contract, but maybe it would be good to highlight in here that the superintendent will make sure to notify the board in an early enough manner, because we'd have to go into a superintendent search again. If that were the case, we would need to find a company, we would need, dive into that whole process again. So to have the earliest notification possible, even But I guess, again, we do put it in the contract too, so I don't know.
Mr. Doran?
Yeah. Um, I favor keeping the policy as succinct as possible. Um, And as long as we have it in the contract, I think that's also one of the nice pieces of having legal counsel review. And we do that as a matter of practice, but I like that in policy, just as an oversight with it. But again, I think that since we make sure it is in contract, that we're well covered. And it doesn't preclude conversations and those expectations. If things aren't going well, we might do an early evaluation. Or superintendent finds out, hey, I've got this great opportunity to become Secretary of Education in Washington, D.C. Maybe I'm under consideration. That would be normal conversations to say whenever that came up, whether it was within that time frame or just, when things come up.
Dillard?
Would you like a sentence that says something along the lines of contract language shall address superintendent notification requirements, or just leave it out completely?
I don't think it's necessary. I have not, and going back and I pull, over the years when I pulled previous contracts, I'm not aware of any in the recent decades that have not had that. And when I've conversations with other districts and around searches, I have not been aware of any that don't have that. But I guess if it's in here that we're going to notify it, and it does tell you, check the contract and consider it, I guess.
That was my only thinking, is that I hope to be here for a very long time. And so who knows who will be the board writing the next superintendent contract. And so some of the times it's going back to policy to remind yourself what might be in the contract or whatever. And so that's why I threw it on the table for discussion.
Yeah, I think it's a good discussion. I mean, these, and the points that staff brings up, I think is extremely important for us to be thinking about. And, as Ms. Burnett was mentioning, that it's, these are the questions, these are the conversations that it's good having this work session. So thank you, Ms. Hardy, for doing it.
I guess if we wanted, could we change the whole sentence to apply to both? So the school board and/or superintendent shall notify each other of their intention to not renew the contract early enough to ensure compliance with any notice requirements listed in the existing contract.
Fine with me. So it would be school board or superintendent shall notify the other.
Yep.
Okay.
Hardy,
So good, yeah.
can you see that?
Are we ready to move to the next one? Okay, moving on. Just for clarity's sake, if you're ready, give me a signal. I've seen some people, okay, but some, usually you look at me, and nobody was. So I saw Mr. Doran, then Ms. Burnett. Was that a question? Was there anyone else? Okay, Mr. Doran, then Ms. Burnett.
Paragraph 3, second sentence, two areas there. The sentence currently says, the superintendent and board members shall agree upon and sign an evaluation summary. In terms of who's signing that, the indication here, implication would be that every board member would sign the evaluation summary. And I think that's clumsy. And, you know, basically our practice has been the board president and the superintendent sign it. So I would suggest those are the two signatures that are on it. And related to that, if I might,
Go ahead, Mr. Doran.
is the word agree, is that the way we process evaluations in our district is the employee has to sign it. It doesn't mean they have to be in agreement with it, but it indicates that they have seen it. And so it's not the best wording, but I would just say the superintendent and board president shall sign the evaluation summary. It's cleanest.
Ms. Burnett.
So this is really just kind of nitpicky. I believe that the first paragraph is very fluffy. I know that sounds, I couldn't find a better word. I feel like it turns the evaluation into something that sounds like it's for fun. And so I thought maybe narrowing it down with better language, something more like the school board shall evaluate the superintendent's performance each year. The framework for evaluation will be selected by the school board. I just thought that paragraph was kind of fluffy, and that we could just get down to the bare bones of what this is. I could be wrong, and I totally respect that.
Mr. Burgess, was that following up? Mr. Doran? Was it a follow-on
I
to that?
follow up to that one. I like what you're raising, and it makes me mindful, and just putting out there for a conversation is that, and I cannot remember the specific wording of the state statute that addresses evaluation, which is, but they do say for improvement, it's, and maybe we could double check that wording, but you know, it does strengthen the working relationship. I mean, supposedly, or it could completely break that down. But I like what you're trying, and that's probably the problem with the current wording, is that it kind of, yeah, it is fluffy. It's out there. But I think it is a good piece to capture what even state law says about evaluation. That it's meant to be productive, geared towards improvement and growth, rather than the idea that evaluation is possibly a getcha. So
Follow-up, then Ms. Sanderson.
Not to argue semantics, I still would somehow like the word shall put in there. And maybe that's just adding more fluff to it. I just like the indefinite of saying we will evaluate the superintendent. So maybe that looks like the school board believes that an annual evaluation of the superintendent's performance strengthens working relationships between the superintendent and the school board. The school board shall evaluate the superintendent each year, the framework of which will be selected by the school board. I know that's really redundant because there's like 3 school boards in a row. I'm not a great wordsmith, but somehow with the word shall in there.
yeah, I think.
Ms. Sanderson.
I was thinking, I don't have it in front of me, but the AASB roles and responsibility, I think there's language in there that probably would capture what we're trying to do. I just don't remember that little flyer, and it has those little bullet points, and I think it might state something that we could use. I agree.
Mr. Burgess, then Mr. Doran.
I appreciate this discussion, and I did, I did like the version that you just removed, Ms. Dillard, where it says the school board shall evaluate the superintendent annually. And then we can say, because or with the intent of strengthening the relationship, something along those lines. And I think that we can, not to make it too wordy, but I wouldn't mind something in there about, opportunities for professional development or something along those lines too. Just throwing that out for discussion. Or not.
Could do something like the school board, in accordance with its belief that, where is it? Now I'm reading from too far. That an annual evaluation of the superintendent's performance strengthens working relationships between the superintendent and the board, shall create a framework for evaluation that will be selected by the school board, or in some way making the
Not catch that. I'm sorry, Ms. Hardy.
Mr. Doran.
I really like the direction we're headed, and I think it is getting away from it has a good intent, where it's that, and it's just that it's going to be done yearly, and I think, yeah, that was missing. The framework, I was just looking at last sentence and maybe suggesting in collaboration with the superintendent, because I think one of the things that really was a significant change in our recent contract negotiations was, and it's in the superintendent's contract, is that there's a mutual working together on that. And I know oftentimes I wanted to change my evaluations that I was getting from staff because it didn't give me the feedback. And I think that was the conversation we had during our initial contract negotiations with Mr. Minot, that that we wanted a mutuality for that, so that it was beneficial to him as superintendent, beneficial to us as a board. We have final say, but there's that collaboration piece.
Burgess.
So Ms. Dillard, I think that as you're trying to capture this, and you're doing a great job, I think that Mr. Doran's intent was to put that in collaboration with the superintendent at the end of the paragraph.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
It's got to be challenging to keep up with all of us, so thank you for doing this job.
Can I throw a curveball at you now that I wrote it out? Okay. The school board, in its belief that an annual evaluation of the superintendent's performance strengthens working relationships between the superintendent and the board and creates opportunities for professional growth, shall mutually create a framework for evaluation that will be used by the school board, or something. The end isn't perfect.
I was going to say, can you email that to me? I can, if you email it to me, I can put it up on the board too, real quick.
I was thinking the chat thing too was another way. Sent that. The end's still not right. Grammar is helping. Changed it even more. Through Google Docs. I sent you a version too. I'm sorry.
It's fine, I don't want my email showing up on the screen because there's all kinds of student stuff in there.
I can read it again for.
I've got it, I've
people,
got
or-
it.
Okay.
Would you like me to read it?
Sure.
So the second one you sent says, "It is the belief that an annual evaluation of the superintendent's performance strengthens working relationships between the superintendent and the school board and creates opportunities for professional growth. For professional growth, the school board shall mutually develop a framework for evaluation with the superintendent that the board will use in their evaluation." Would that be another sentence? Let's see. The school board shall mutually develop a framework for evaluation with the superintendent that the board will use in their evaluation.
Mr. Doran.
I think that last part that the board will use in their evaluation can be deleted. It's actually, would be redundant. Just the last, that the board will use in their evaluation, just that last bit, not the whole sentence.
Mr. Burgess.
So if we're striking that, then we need to, in that first sentence, that first sentence is incomplete. We need to, so in its belief that an annual evaluation of the superintendent's performance strengthens working relationships between the superintendent and school board and creates opportunities for professional growth, the school board shall conduct an annual evaluation. Because it's hanging right now.
Can you say that one more time? Where did you want that at?
Yeah, at the very end of that first sentence, we need to add the shall conduct an annual. I think that's good now.
Evaluation.
I can certainly work on this and look at the statute language for the purpose of evaluations and wordsmith it a little bit and send it out to you, or
Thank you, Ms.
We have
Stoddard.
our 3 versions.
I'm hearing where you want to go
Yeah.
with it.
I think we're all on the same page with it.
And
Mr. Doran.
I tend to lean towards that third one just for simplicity, but anyway.
Other than that, are we ready to look at the next one? Okay, moving on to 2210. Mr. Burgess, then Mr. Doran.
I think this is maybe a minor thing, but I would, in that very last sentence, I would, instead of "it shall be the duty," I would just say "it is the duty of the superintendent."
Mr. Doran.
In paragraph 1, last sentence, if the action necessitates the addition, revision, or waiver, I would suggest putting waiver in that. We've actually done that in circumstances, and usually it's the recommendation from the superintendent. I think that's the primary piece with it. Certainly in an emergency, the superintendent may have to take things and then come back to the board, whether that was a waiver or not, but that's my rationale for it.
After those, are we ready to move on? 2250. Making sure Mr. Burgess is it. All right. Ms. Burnett, then Mr. Doran.
I've become quite a little policy geek. It's hilarious. So if the very last paragraph, and there may be another area in here, I'll have to look up again, but the very last paragraph, talking about the administrator designee, it says the delegation of school and program site duties shall not relieve the building administrator of the responsibilities for actions by the designee. I'm wondering if that can also say the building administrator or designee of the responsibilities for actions by the designee. Maybe that's a little redundant, but I feel this also might escape the designee of responsibility as well. And I know it's still the superintendent or the building administrator's position. Does that make sense what I'm saying? That there should still be maybe some responsibility there for the designee as well.
Dr. Minor.
Yeah, I definitely understand the intent. I'm not sure how to word what you're trying to get at.
Possibly if we started that first or that second paragraph, the building administrator designee is expected to administer the school in accordance with board policy, administrative regulations and procedures and the law. The delegation of school and program site duties shall not relieve the building administrator of the responsibility for actions by the designee. So it's not a huge change, but instead of shall in that first sentence, will is expected to administer.
Mr. Doran.
Okay, I'm going to address the last sentence first. That, and having been a building administrator who has had designees, I'm still responsible for whatever they do, and I have to follow up for it. And their accountability is actually to that building administrator, their principal. So they were, if something was way off, they were held accountable quickly, or it was opportunities for guidance to it. So I think that the way it is here, it is still that building administrator's responsibility, and they're the ones accountable because they also choose who their designee is, and the expectation is that they pick someone who can handle it. I don't have a real issue whether it's or expected to or shall. I think it's the same thing, and in practicality, it's that the designee may not know as much, especially in elementary, where you don't have an assistant principal. You have a teacher stepping in or other staff members stepping in, to the best of their ability, and I think principals work really hard to make sure they know who to call, whether it's which assistant superintendent, you got a question, I'm out of town, you can't get hold of me, call downtown, and downtown has been wonderfully supportive in those situations. So I don't really have a question. Maybe it takes a little bit of onus off the designee to say, yes, I'll be your designee while you're gone, by saying they're expected to be, to administer. It's, does that just?
I still like the wording you had for the beginning of the sentence. But I agree. I hear you.
Yeah, and I'm
I
okay.
do like that wording better
Right.
at the beginning, though.
And I'm
I think that
agreeable with
does
that.
it does what I would like it to do without changing that ends. And it's still, yes, I agree.
Is there anything further, Mr. Doran?
Okay, well, we're in that section, but in the first paragraph of that, two things. The first sentence is, I think, unnecessary. So the whole first sentence and the word therefore, the second sentence. Do we have to state that we're, I mean, we know people are out, and I don't know that that needs to we have to state the obvious. And so again, simplicity. So I would suggest that it starts on the second line there at the very end, the school board authorizes. And then related to that when you're ready.
Go ahead, Mr. Doran.
Is we don't have a position of building designee, and I don't think we want to authorize a position again, for a variety of reasons. One, it adds perhaps more, another job category, another expenditure, but also, especially in elementary schools or programs, you're often asking someone to take that on for the day or a couple of days, someone on staff. And so it's not really a position there, but I would say authorizes the designation of building administrators designee. And I know common practice has been, if I'm going for a conference, I would call downtown and say, okay, this person is going to fill in for me. And sometimes they're subbing, sometimes they're doing their job, but they're the ones that the school office will call, for instance. So I think if we just have that designation instead of a position is.
Mr. Burgess.
I agree with the intent here. I don't know that the language is perfect yet, but I think maybe this would be something that I'd like to think about and send something via email at a later time. Is that acceptable?
That's fine. I agree. I don't love the language either. Feels more like. If it was something like the school board authorizes the building administrator to appoint a designee in their absence.
There you go.
Yeah, it's awkward wording, and we're getting clearer on it. Yeah, it's actually authorizing, especially taking position out, it's authorizing the building administrator to designate, yeah.
I agree also with Mr. Doran with the removal of that first sentence, but I would like to clarify here that we're not authorizing the building administrator to appoint a designee at any time, just because. So I would just add, in the event of the building administrator's absence to the beginning, yes.
What if we simplified it and just went, the school board authorizes the building administrator to appoint a designee in their absence?
That works too.
Mr. Doran.
And just clarity to the administration, I assume it's similar now as it's been in the past. Being at a meeting downtown does not constitute typically an absence. I mean, there can be extenuating circumstances, but
That's correct.
we really do a designee when they're out of town. But I think this is okay as long as we.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets us there. We've got practices in place that building administrators let downtown know when they're out. We try to get subs in for them with credentialed principals or retired principals if we can. And if we can't fill that, then we work internally with the school to find somebody that can be the designee.
Mr. Doran.
Sorry, I guess it's too many practicalities. I like the pulling out that absence. It's in order to provide proper supervision is really the goal, supervision and maintained continuity. Because I'm thinking, and I've known principals that said, hey, I'm downtown for meetings, so can I have somebody? I know that those requests have gone in. And our practice has been, no, you don't need that. You get called back if you need to go, there's no issue. I also know any number of situations where principals have been sick but they're on the phone. They can be called, and so they're not appointing a designee, and I'm particularly concerned with that, given the shortage of subs, that we have been very fortunate with a number of, staffs in our schools who have said, yeah, if they need help at the office, just call me, and the secretary covers the classroom, or somebody goes and that person comes down and deals with whatever the situation is. So I think it's that idea that, yes, if you needed to keep that continuity, then that's when you have a designee. And superintendent may determine when that is special circumstances in the building, even if they're down here, whatever.
And change to when required, which I think covers the bases.
Yep. That's good.
Anything else on this, Paul? Or, yes, Mr. Doran.
Okay, moving up, and this might be more of a question. Second paragraph. For what I'm thinking is district-wide staff. And for the last several decades, we've increased the number of district-wide staff designations. Even though I'm thinking of speech-language pathologists is one of the first examples that was completely moved into a district-wide status, even though they were completely assigned to individual schools, because sometimes that needs to change, and so that's what. And I'm just trying to figure out how this applies as we've moved more and more nurses have been pulled as district-wide designation, even though they're at assigned schools primarily. And to the administration, you might be able to address that better because you deal with it. And I'm just trying to figure out how that plays in this wording.
Yeah, I mean, I think assigned is the key word there, because district-wide folks aren't technically assigned to a school. They're assigned to a district-wide group. And so I don't know if we could flesh that out in the AR maybe, or to make that differentiation. I don't know that it needs to go in policy, but it might be in a good place that we flag for AR, and specifically call out what assigned means and what that looks like for district-wide staff and who they directly report to.
Follow up?
Mr. Doran.
Okay, and I'm comfortable with it being addressed in AR, because I think then that would be the appropriate place for my other comments in terms of evaluation. When we've had, I'm thinking particularly band orchestra teachers, we determine one of the principals that may be working with 3 or 4, and one principal would be responsible for doing that evaluation. And also in terms of the clarification, then if they're in the school building, it's the principal who does the evaluation rather than someone downtown who may not know what they're doing. So if that addressed in AR, district-wide evaluation responsibility, those types of things, I'm comfortable.
Okay, that'd be great. And welcome, Meredith.
Mr. Doran.
Paragraph 3, I highlighted the word loyalty. Are expected to demonstrate commitment to the school district. I would suggest striking loyalty. It's got a lot of subjectiveness to it and history around what is loyalty, both going back to World War II and post-World War II and to present day. So I think that the idea is it's a commitment to the district, and I think then that can be addressed appropriately by the administration if there's an issue.
Doran, did you have more?
I have one more. Fourth paragraph, last phrase, upon the approval of the superintendent. I'd strike that and just say it's in accord with policies and the superintendent implements the policies. And so if there's but if a building administrator is working within those policies in accord with that, they don't need to call downtown to get approval. If they're not doing it in accord with the policies, they will be called into account. So
That makes sense to me. It's a good edit.
I think we're ready to move to 2100, and that's page 9, if you're catching up. Any edits for this one? Mr. Doran?
I suggest that first paragraph be deleted completely. It really talks about the delegation of that authority, and it's addressed in 2120 on page 3 of our packet.
Mr. Doran?
And I did actually have a question. I'm okay with the second paragraph staying. I do wonder why it's necessary. And so in that broader thought, I would say we don't need 2100, but if we do, then then the second paragraph is fine, but I just question that.
Yeah, I think it was a policy that came over from AASB, and I do think, given the other policies that come before it, that it's not entirely necessary.
Ms. Burnett?
Yeah, I mean, if it's not needed, I would be in favor of striking it. I think that's part of this is striking unnecessary and unneeded policies that are just producing a lot of fluff. So we already have policies that address this. This one could go.
Ms. Dillard?
I'll just add that this does correspond to our policy 320, not that it changes your opinion or anything, but just to highlight it. And it says, the authority of the board is delegated to and through the superintendent. As shown in the organizational chart, the superintendent shall recommend changes in the administrative structure to provide adequately for supervision and accountability throughout the school district. So that was the match to that AASB language.
Everyone still feeling comfortable striking it? Mr. Burgess, then Ms. Burnett, then maybe Mr. Doran.
I do agree that it's a bit redundant with 2120. However, there is a specific thing that's said here that isn't necessarily clear in 2120, and that is that the superintendent may adjust the organization or the staff responsibilities to accommodate district's needs. I don't know that that needs to be said. I think it's probably pretty clear when we say, the school board delegates to the superintendent the power to make decisions concerning internal operations of the district. That's pretty broad and probably includes this power or could be interpreted to do so. But I did want to highlight, just in case if there's any concerns, that this specific thing is not set in 2120.
Ms. Burnett.
I guess my question would be, why wouldn't we just take AASB's language? That seemed pretty cut and dry and in simplified form.
Mr. Doran had proposed striking the whole thing, so I was figuring people would say where they were.
So to answer Ms. Burnett's question, what was up on the board was our existing policy. What's before you is AASB's.
Oh, okay. So we had the more simplified version. Sorry, I got those backwards.
Correct, yep.
Yeah, I would still be in favor of striking this then.
Mr. Doran.
Okay. If we're focusing on the second paragraph here, I'm not wedded either way with it. If we feel that it should be in there, I do think it's covered in other parts, just operation of the school district. The first one is very definitely redundant, the first paragraph. So, but focusing on that second one is, I was just tossing it out there, and I'm not wedded one way or the other to that one.
I have a question for Ms. Dillard. Does this mess up our numbering in some way to just remove an entire?
No, we're doing our best to stick with the numbering system that ASB provides instead of just creating our own, although we've done that a couple times. But no, taking it out, it'll just be gone. It doesn't mess anything up.
And just
Burgess.
to be clear, I'm fine with striking it too. I just was making sure that everyone is tracking what we're losing, which I don't mind losing. I agree that it's covered elsewhere.
So I think we're moving to 2110. Was this on the last one, Mr. Doran?
Well, I was just going to say the next one really addresses the organizational chart. So there.
Any comments or? Yep, Dr. Minor.
If we're going for succinctness, I might recommend deleting all of paragraph 2. In practice, I'm not sure when you have an organization chart, how you then clarify working relationships and functions within an organizational chart. I think a lot of that is explained through job descriptions and function once an individual starts, but thinking that you're going to do that on top of an organizational chart seems a little silly to me.
They understand whom they're responsible for.
You know, in his downtime.
A lot of people. Any other edits on this one? Okay, so I think striking the last one and Ms. Burnett and Mr. Doran.
Just wondering how needed that second paragraph is. I think that is kind of an overreach in like trying to control what the superintendent can and can't do. Obviously, the superintendent would put school duties ahead of anything else. But I also think it's important the superintendent have those communications and speakings and meetings and whatnot that he needs to tend to. And I would 100% trust that our superintendent would be putting our schools first before that.
Mr. Doran, then Mr. Burgess.
I would leave it, and because it has come up a number of times with different superintendents, sometimes even just tangentially. So there are times when superintendents, I've seen this in other parts of the state, also where they're taking on other duties, they're writing a book for their own profit, they're traveling around for speeches, they're invited to different places and building a consultancy base. But I think it is good to say, yes, we recognize there are terms where you may, just professionally and their own growth and stuff, they're working on their PhD, and they might produce something that's part of that they may publish or something like that. That there's room for understanding that, but it cannot take away from their responsibilities. And I kind of like the idea of the energy piece as well, as a superintendent in the district. So I think it recognizes there are sometimes things outside that person may appropriately, and it may actually be to the benefit of the district in building our reputation or whatever, but that it also sets clearly that the priority is taking care of their job that they're hired with. So that's why I like it, and it gives us some guidance, but also some leeway as well. And I know it has become part of contract negotiations, and so I don't believe in this district, but I know elsewhere. Yes.
Mr. Burgess, did you still have something?
No, I think that I had a question about the intent of the wording there, and I think Mr. Dora just answered that.
I'm also side with keeping it in. It's pretty standard, like university professors have similar requirements that you have to let your employers know when you're not taking away from your job. Any edits then? Mr. Doran.
Along the lines of Ms. Burnett earlier, the fluffiness, the first sentence, I would suggest stating the obvious. you know, that's a complex job. There are many components. It's not necessary.
Any other edits? Okay. 2230. Any edits on this one? I guess I do that very last bit about expenses incurred for consulting services and materials and travel. A while back, not under the superintendent, not even under the last one, a while ago, I know that there was a thing that was created, money was spent, and then there was never any product that came out of it. And it felt like both the public and the school board didn't really know what was going on. It was researching for a different school type. I'm wondering if it might be good to add in something of accountability, of like the superintendent shall report to the board the outcome of, you know, those investigations, and open to Dr. Meinert's thoughts on this. I just, as I was part of it, working at a school of one of the people involved, it seemed like a lot of money spent on something that never had any benefit in the end.
Yeah, I mean, I'm supportive of that. If we're spending money on it, then the board should definitely be aware of, what those advisory committees are working on.
You fund expenditures and outcomes or products or something to the board. Mr. Doran.
I don't have any wording in mind, but just adding to the conversation, that, and I'm thinking of the practicality. I think there's merit to what you're saying. At the same time, how much money is going into that type of thing? The superintendent might send a team to look at some different schools. I'm thinking of alternative high schools, or particularly at one point the district was exploring what different models were, et cetera. And they came back, and they might come, at the same time they may go to explore something, and they say, yeah, this isn't for us. It was good to check it out. So there isn't a product. The product is not for us. So I'm just trying to think in terms of how this works without tying the superintendent's hands, as long as it's within the budgetary. But we've also said, they can make transfers up to $100,000, so, which is a big chunk of money. But we said that's okay. But if it's $5,000, what's that accountability back? So I'm a little concerned about this becoming unwieldy in practice. Uh, um,
I would say like tens of thousands of dollars. Like I know that this involves significant travel and all kinds of things that had happened. And then we had money then and we don't have it now. And I don't even know where the outcome of those reports and things ever went. So just closing the loop, having a place where we're accountable to our community for the money that we're spending, especially if we're exploring new ideas. I'm totally okay with exploring new ideas, and I'm okay with actually this isn't for us. We don't think this is a good thing, but then there should be some kind of, hey, we explored it and we decided it didn't fit Fairbanks. Mr. Doran.
Looking at this from two possible perspectives in terms of that sentence is that if committee members are expected to do something, and this is very different than usually management team, although if you send management team a group from there to something that they shouldn't be out of their pocket, so it's reassuring them that those are covered. I'm thinking that if there was a question of appropriateness, end result, how it was done, maybe with good intent, but retrospect, we'd like to be more careful that we can handle that within the evaluation process, and that here it's just saying that if there's a committee and hopefully or very often, I think, not necessarily, but very often the superintendent might say, hey, I'm sending a team to this as part of their reports. So keeping this piece for the committee that, yes, if there are costs, they can be covered. The responsibility for the financial operation overall is is covered, that the superintendent is accountable that they've used the money appropriately, rather than putting it in here and putting that onus on the committee.
Ms. Burnett.
Do you have any of said things, Dr. Minor? I know you have a consult, which was part of your hiring.
Yeah, I mean, I would generally say no, but as Mr. Doran, talks about different ways that we explore opportunities, the policy is rather broad. And so I do share Mr. Doran's concerns as we start to walk down this line, what the superintendent may or may not be responsible for reporting. And certainly when it comes to the funds of it, when we were initially discussing it, I thought it was more like keeping the board aware of exploratory ideas, not so much on the funding side of it, because there are other policies that deal with the funding portion of it.
Is less on the funding side and more on the board and community should be aware of what we're doing.
Well,
So
may
if we
I
took
follow
out
up?
the expenditure part, that's fine, but should report. Yeah, go ahead, Ms.
I actually wanted the expenditure part taken out altogether because I know that that's included in other areas. I don't think we need anything about expenses in this. It can just be the first paragraph. I'd like to strike the whole second paragraph. That's just my purview of it.
Mr. Doran.
I'd be comfortable with that because I think it is really addressed in other areas that, employees, business expenses are covered. I mean, I think it's referenced in other areas, and that would avoid the distraction because a lot of these groups don't cost money, anyway, so.
Last one.
Can I just add one comment while we're looking at this? We have pretty robust conflict of interest policies in board bylaws, in upcoming personnel policy, and a couple of other places, so just so you're aware. And Article 3, too. This one is very short and sweet, but we do address conflict of interest in a couple places.
I was actually going to say that, and I'd be in favor of this going away, because we do address this quite a bit.
Mr. Doran, then Ms. Sanderson, sorry.
And I was going to suggest getting rid of certainly the first sentence. There's an implied redundancy there. But I'd be comfortable with if we did away with it, because most of this section is administration and superintendent and stuff, and we do have the other conflicts. And Ms. Dillard, I think you did indicate that in our employee section, I think we do have something very much like this. Is that correct?
We do. The second paragraph is from our policy language, and it's actually the same exact policy that we have in two separate places. We have it in Chapter 3, which is administration, so we do have it there currently. And then we also have it currently in a personnel policy in Chapter 5.
Okay. Yeah, because I think it is important that we do have it. Thank you. So if it's there, then, because I do know there are sometimes people who have created something or whatever, or they don't realize that, yeah, this is a good source for it, but no, it's your business. So,
So are you saying that we should actually keep this here? Since
no,
you-
as long as it's
Okay.
clearly elsewhere where
Okay.
personnel particularly will see that, then that's great. I don't see it as a need here, especially given what this section is dealing with primarily.
Ms. Sanderson.
My question was along the lines of, so in the other parts of our conflicts of interest, if his wife wanted to be our secretary, then that would have to come before the board approves it, and as long as they're not under the direct supervision that's covered in the rest of our conflict of interest policy. Yes, that's clear. Okay, that's it, just clarification.
Anything else on this one? Seems like we're striking the whole thing. We're okay. Making sure. Okay, so at that point, that is the, was there something else?
I'm not sure.
Oh, sorry, where were we?
Clarification from you, so you're striking everything underneath after the first sentence.
I think
Whole thing is going away.
it seemed like the whole thing was going to
Okay.
be stricken as we had it other places.
Oh, okay, because, yeah, employee relatives, conflict of interest codes and relations and vendors. Okay, all right, thank you.
So that is the end of the 200s. We have the 300s here. We've gone over it before in a prior work session. It is 56 pages long, so I don't suggest that we do what we just did again with this one. I assume we went through pretty much every page last time, but if we want to go through it, we can. Or if we want to go through certain pieces of it, the other option is board members can go through, and if they think that there's things that they missed, they can email to Ms. Dillard and we can see it again. Do you remember, was there anything from this when we went through where there were points of contention?
Yes.
Okay, do you remember which ones those were? Because those might be the best to, if we're gonna spend time.
Yes, definitely the conversation around increasing what has to be by formal bid. And then I'd have to kind of go through to remind myself, but I think there were a couple that there was some robust conversation around. I did want to just put out there real quick too, as far as the superintendent or designee, I did go a different direction than what I was hearing discussed at the beginning of the meeting. ASB does superintendent or designee everywhere, And the only place that I decided, or that I chose not to do or designee was in Article 2 because it's specifically speaking about the superintendent. But I just need to know so that I can make a global change even for tomorrow night's Articles 0 and 1. That would mean taking out all of the or designee. I see both sides to it. Ideally, if we can replace superintendent or designee with the actual department, then that is more specific to what those duties are delegated or to whom those duties are delegated. However, sometimes those departments or the people responsible might change. It's kind of a good place filler for when you're saying, obviously, the superintendent doesn't do this job themselves. However, this is what is done under the direction of the superintendent, so whatever you think.
Ms. Burnett, then Mr. Doran.
So I will say first, I would really like to get into our executive session. So I would not be in favor of digging through this whole thing tonight. But to the or designee, I don't agree that we should be removing or designee from everything. There are cases and scenarios where that is specifically needed, especially for the public. Whereas we may say the superintendent is responsible, da 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 da. If we don't add designee and then say something happens, Dr. Minor isn't there, there's a designee in place, something happens. I strongly feel that or designee needs to be there. I understand why we didn't do it in the superintendent chapter, and that's great. But in these other chapters, for myself, that or designee is needed.
Mr. Burgess, is that a follow-up to what Ms. Burnett was saying? Go ahead.
Yeah, so as far as the or designee thing, to me, it's 6 one way, half a dozen the other. I will say that, in regulations that I'm used to working with at work, whenever it refers to the head of our department or the commissioner, it does not necessarily say or designee, because that's basically understood that staff can be designated or certain staff are designated. There's maybe 1 or 2 places that it shows up in those regulations. Again, I don't think it's that critical, and if I'd be in favor of whatever is less work for Ms. Dillard.
Mr. Doran.
I favor getting rid of or designee, and it's just shortage of wordage. Does it really make a big difference? No, because it always comes back to the superintendent in our situation. And I've current conversation and conversation with a previous board that I wasn't on, but they also got rid of it just because it adds wordage. And it's not necessary there. I would be really cautious about putting in departments or things of this sort because department titles change and departments may change, and especially in budget times we combine departments, or we have opportunities, we increase departments, those types of things. The fact is that whether the superintendent is in town or not, he or she is responsible, and that's where it's going to go to. And then, but we've said that the superintendent can designate duties, and so I think it's clear. But if it's a piece, I mean, it's sort of nickel and diming words, but I think clarity is it's the superintendent has responsibility. And I do think for the public, it reinforces the piece that the superintendent is the responsible person. They may get the call and then say, okay, ask one of the assistant superintendents or department head to follow up on it with the principal or with the public member or whoever it is, that they have the best information, but that it's not shifting that off any place. It's to the superintendent, they take action. So I like leaving it just superintendent and dropping or designee throughout That's my preference.
I'm going to put myself in. I'm more with Ms. Burnett that I think we should keep or designate. It is longer and wordier, but people are extremely literal. And if a public member who isn't a part of the board or isn't, knows the nuance and they're upset, they're going to go to our policies, they're going to read it, and they're going to say the superintendent. And then when they pick up the phone and somebody else says, no, I can handle it, they're going to be like, no, it says I'm supposed to speak to the superintendent. And they're going to want the person on the page. And then that person now has to explain to them, well, actually, I'm his designee and I'm allowed to say these things. And people, when they're upset, are more literal than ever. That's what they're going to go to. And so if just leaving it in there keeps a few things from happening, I think it's worth it. And it is less work for Ms. Dillard because she doesn't have to make a global change. And it is explicit throughout the policy manual there, which is really for other people, not so much like it's part of us, but we get emails and they'll reference our policy. That's where they go to. Ms. Sanderson.
I was gonna say, I agree with the both of you. Out of the years that I've been in district, I've seen it happen both ways. Somebody in the school will say, well, who's the principal put in charge? Who's the principal designate? Well, who's the one speaking for the principal? Well, who's gonna handle this? So the designee part doesn't bother me because, again, as we're getting more savvy with these policies, so is the public.
Trying to get a consensus so Ms. Dillard knows where she's going. I'm seeing more of a consensus. Well, it sounded like Ms. Sanderson was saying we should get rid of it. No. Keep it, okay. I misunderstood.
I'm fine with keeping it.
Okay. I'm thinking it's staying. So that has ended our twos now. We're on threes, Mr. Doran.
I'm amenable if we don't want to do 3 tonight, but I do think there are a lot of edits in it, and I would prefer to do that at a work session rather than hashing it out, wordsmithing during a first reading. I think there's a lot of, and I had also put in the context of we've gone through a tremendous process, thanks to Ms. Sanderson and Mrs. Hardy, in leading us through the shift. But it's also been a lot of brainstorming, and you get wording down, and then you think about it, and you see what the ramifications are, because we're trying to be careful that we don't lose things from the previous that may be important as we update and bring some new versions in. But I would much rather do that in work session and streamline our regular meeting.
Mr. Burgess, then Ms. Sanderson.
Just adding on to that, I am happy to have a separate work session and not get into this tonight. And I would suggest that maybe we can do what we did with the previous articles in first reading and send, if people have several edits, send them ahead of the work session so that the whole board can be informed ahead of time.
Ms. Sanderson, then Ms. Marati, unless it was a follow-up. Okay.
Actually, what Mr. Burgess just stated, I was just gonna say, it helps us to be able to move forward. If those prior edits, I'm not great at editing, that's why I'm quiet. When I hear it out, then I can say, oh, yeah, that works. But it would be nice to have them submitted. That way we can look at them, and then have to move our business along. Thank you.
Ms. Marati.
Yeah, I just wanted to throw in support for coming back to this. Also, this this chapter is interesting because I would say if you look through it, it's concepts and roles, which is vague. And then the first 2 pages plus, and then through 3512 are about, I would say, and for lack of a better way to explain it, it's everything under Mr. DeGraw. And then it gets into like vaping and intruders and safety and energy conservation, like all these other things that are very different in my brain. And maybe it's just my brain, I'm not sure. But I would maybe suggest breaking it out in that, at least in half in that way, into 2 different work sessions. Because I could see us getting really opinionated about business operations and also safety measures and policies.
So what I'm hearing is we would like to have at least 1, maybe 2 work sessions on this one, and that we've all mutually agreed to a little bit of homework, and that we should come into those work sessions having read and having a general idea where we feel, so we can move through this a little quicker. Okay. Ms. Marati.
And you sent that email out yesterday reminding us of the goals that we talked about, and one of them was on the fiduciary responsibilities as board members, and that is part of the first half of the next chapter. And so I will try to work on that and work with Dr. Meinert on that so that maybe by then we can bring it back to the board.
We will try to get it scheduled before you leave us. Otherwise, we'll invite you back as a special guest. Okay, so we are not doing 3 then, and we all have some homework. I put the public testimony piece on here so that if we wanted to discuss, we had the opportunity and it had been noticed, because I think we've all had other ideas and things percolating, and I wanted to give us the opportunity if we want it. We noticed that we would be discussing public testimony, and if we want to do anything or make any changes, including Ms. Marati, and then I actually spoke with one of the Anchorage School Board members, their idea of having a protected time at the top in that hour for any students that are wanting to testify, or it felt unfinished. And so since we can't all talk together unless it's noticed, it has been noticed. Ms. Burnett.
If we're having this discussion, my feelings have not changed. I do not agree that we move public testimony to the end of an agenda. I think it's a disenfranchise, a disservice to the community, to our teachers, to students, so on and so forth. But that's not to say that I would not be in favor of doing a separate day for public testimony on non-agenda items. It's similar to what UAF and Anchorage do. They have non-agenda day. They take a couple hours on a Monday or so, and they do public testimony on whatever and anything and anything. And I would be in favor of that, but I'm not in favor of making things later for our community.
Ms. Maple.
In that potential setup, would that remove non-agenda item testimony from our agenda during regular meetings, and just moves it to a whole? Okay. I suppose I'm in the exact same place as Ms. Burnett. I continue to reflect on it. I've gotten more feedback from the community since I shared differing thoughts. But I think that's a really perfect solution that it allows us to get on with our board business, but it protects that time in a way that hopefully the community will really hear us and saying, we're not trying to not listen to you, we're just trying to do our work, and also protect our students that do listen in, whether it's for an assignment or because they're interested in what's going on or because their parents are participating, they're not calling in to listen to public testimony on non-agenda items. They're calling in to listen to us do our business. So I think two birds. Yeah.
Ms. Marati.
Would that be similar to what Ms. Hardy proposed in having listening sessions? But I think when we were talking about it, when the group board was talking about it last, they were remote in different communities. But so that, I think, wouldn't that be the only difference then? Because we would listen, there'd be testimony, and it would only be that. Am I missing something?
Just to the point, my intent was not to have it be another point we're being talked at. It was an opportunity to talk to each other. I feel like oftentimes public testimony just is an open mic night instead of a conversation, and you don't make progress talking at each other. You make progress talking to each other. So that would be my concern, that we were just now giving up more of our time to have people talk at us instead of doing anything to collectively find common ground. Ms. Burnett and Ms. Maple. And Mr. Doran.
And with absolute respect to that, I do hear you. But we do sit in the capacity of elected officials, which means that while there are no laws, there are no rules that say we have to do this, it is something we have always done in practice. It is a precedent we have set for years and years and years before this, allowing the public to come in and talk to us, even though it might not be an agenda item. It is something that concerns them about the district, and I in no way condone an open mic for slaughter and for bad decorum. But as I stated in my board comments last 2 weeks ago or whatever that was, that is part of it. And so with respect to the community and their amendment rights for free speech, I strongly feel, and I know that I will get ridiculed for this and be said that I condone it, at the same time I chastise it, and that is absolutely not true whatsoever. But we cannot shut people out, and I strongly feel that way.
Ms. Maple. Then it's Doran, then Ms. Sanderson, then Ms. Marati.
I would, I hear those as two different things, and would those being the listening sessions versus just moving public testimony on non-agenda items. While I hate to volunteer even more of my time, I honestly would be open to creating space for both of those things, with the hope that creating that space for actual conversation, those listening sessions, could kind of damper the what's happening in the public testimony space. That perhaps if we, make sure that we're saving that we're not eliminating it, and then creating this other space that hopefully could allow us to find more common ground, as opposed to creating a soapbox. That maybe where we are in this very divisive time in the world is that we need more opportunity rather than less, and that those opportunities need to look different. That being said, I don't know when we'll find the time, but I'm open to trying.
Mr. Doran.
To the public testimony in terms of our regular meetings, I strongly feel keeping it the way we have it. And I thought that Ms. Burnett did an excellent job at our last meeting in listing out number of points of consideration. Really, really well done. Not necessarily exhaustive, because I think there are other things one could add to that, but really, really well done. I think that public testimony, and also mindful of one of our goals was communication from our retreat, was communication and engagement with the public. That public testimony time is really important. And if you look at the compendium of it, it has worked quite well. There have been problems with individual evenings on it. But it's an important opportunity to, for the public to come, share their thought, and it's a time when, if they're coming also for an agenda item, they don't have to come twice. So I'm very concerned about saying, well, we're going to do it elsewhere, et cetera. And I know that one of the things calling in to, for instance, the State Board of Education, they only take public comment on one day or one point of their meeting on everything, and you have 3 minutes. They're not as strict as we are, but they're basically it's 3 minutes. And if you have a general comment to make and you want to talk to an agenda item, it's really, really difficult. So I think we're having a general time. I think our general thing is to limit it to an hour. It's important. We make exceptions for major topics. Budget as an example, we've opened that longer, et cetera. And we can do that, and we can do that with agenda items, though I think it is important to have a guiding limit. I think it's important, and I really appreciate Ms. Hardy's comment about, there's a difference between sort of having a conversation and being talked at, for lack of a better term. And I think that addresses, and I'm very supportive of what Ms. Mabel just mentioned about listening sessions are one thing. Public testimony is another. And a lot of times, and I've thought, even as we've talked about ideas of having an opportunity for board comments closer to the public testimony, a lot of times we get something in public testimony, sometimes very positive things, sometimes things for improvement, sometimes just a general concern or point of interest that's been shared with us. And it's good to, and we say very clearly, we're not going to respond to them in most cases. Sometimes it's something that we can, but in most cases, our general guideline is we're not, and expectations we're not, because sometimes it takes thought, and I think that's important. So in short, I'm very much saying, yes, keep our structure as we have for our regular meetings. I think that really meets our community things. I think we can still provide a sense of decorum and help to bring, to model within our educational institution how that takes place, that discourse takes place. And I think that we sometimes have students mixed in that and such, and that the public is aware that lots of people are listening, and it doesn't have to be a student. Lots of people are listening. But I do really strongly say that support that we take a serious look at the listening session or what that looks like. I thought we modeled that as a district really well with the budget forums. We have a wonderful opportunity around strategic planning to have listening sessions with that and spreading around the community. It also means that, possibly for listening sessions, we don't need every board member there as you want at the regular meeting, but we can get those conversations going. And so I'd like to see us pursue the listening sessions, particularly taking advantage of strategic planning this year. I think it's absolute, and probably at budget time we'll want to have that in there. And it has been something that this board and previous boards have talked about. We really haven't gotten off, and kudos for last year to the administration and the board leadership for helping to put together those budget listening sessions. So I think we've got a model. We can use that and do that. But at this point, other than reinforcing expectations of decorum, civil discourse, that we continue with public testimony and the structure that we have.
Ms. Sanderson, Ms. Marati, then Ms. Maple. Ms. Sanderson, then Ms. Maple.
I do too, but I'll go for the listening sessions, gathering information, giving opportunity for a community to have their voice. And yeah, I'll go for the listening session.
Ms. Maple.
The only thing I wanted to touch on is that when we're making requests for decorum and trying to model, what we believe is appropriate behavior in this setting, I just want to bring attention to the fact that that's actively being mocked right now. Maybe not in the meeting, but in letters to the editor, in Must Read Alaska, and across social media, in the comments on district posts and borough business posts. This concept that we're asking for decorum is unfortunately really not reaching it's not accomplishing our intended goal, which is unfortunate. It's frustrating. But I do think that, continuing to have this conversation, that it's important for us to be aware of the fact that the basic model we're trying is ineffective. So trying to find a solution that ensures that people do not feel silenced, but also acknowledges the fact that asking people to be polite is just simply ineffective at this moment. And none of these changes, of course, have to be, even if we make this change, it would still be at a future board president's discretion to move public testimony on non-agenda items back to an agenda. So there is plenty of room for it's not a permanent change. Yeah, that's all.
Mr. Burgess, and then I'm going to put myself in, and then Ms. Burnett and Mr. Doran.
I'm going to preface my comments with the statement that I actually have spoken with our constituents, and I have come around to being closer to not wanting to change public testimony on our agenda. But we have we have an ongoing problem in this community. It might just be a handful of people, but it's there. And the problem is that, as Ms. Maple was saying, requests for decorum are mocked. In a very personal way. Some of these people who are showing up regularly, who are the most organized, who seem to have the most time on their hands. It's not saying that I don't want to hear from people, but the way in which they choose to approach this is lacking of all decorum. And I don't think there's any self-awareness there. We get people showing up filled with misinformation from sensationalist blogs. They come in here to our chambers, and we give them a platform from which they spout hate speech and abuse. Okay? That's what's happening. It's extremely concerning to me, extremely concerning. We don't have to give them that platform, and it is not a violation of anybody's rights to free speech to take a platform away. They can still speak on all sorts of other platforms. It affects our ability to do the job. At our last meeting, I was dissociating after that occurrence. I did not retain any of the information that was presented to us there. I had to go back and watch it later. This is a really heavy thing for board members to have to carry on top of all the other responsibilities that we have. And again, I do value public testimony. I do think that there are good reasons to have it as a part of our regular agenda. But we are seeing a repeated cycle of abuse of the platform that we provide. We are providing a platform. People are abusing that platform in order to abuse people, individuals, demographics. And I think we need to do something about it. Okay, and I would, you know, again, yeah, adding to the preamble that we expect decorum, reminding people that public is listening, including students, very likely. That's all good. But I don't think some of these people care. I don't think it's going to help. So I honestly, I don't know where I land right now. I'm clearly a bit emotional because of the events of the past couple weeks. And I'm reluctant to commit firmly in any way because of that. But this has been a problem before I was the subject of the attacks. This has been a problem for a long time. It seems to be a growing problem here and at the Assembly. And I think that the real solution, the best solution, is something that's completely out of our control, and that is for the other people in this community to start raising their voices. We need reasonable, well-informed people to be showing up, and they're not. Okay, sometimes they do. But this small group of people that shows up regularly, they're very well organized and very misinformed. And the misinformation is what drives their passion to show up over and over again. And then we give them this platform to spread the misinformation, hate speech, and abuse. And it bothers me. I feel like by giving them the platform, we are complicit. Again, I don't know that I want to make any changes at all. I think I would favor, if any change was made, I would favor having testimony on non-agenda items on a different night. And it could be for a longer period of time than 1 hour. But that also concerns me because we're all, you know, we can get burned out. We're all human beings with a lot on our plates besides our duties here on the board. So I don't know what the solution is here, but I think we need to recognize that this is a serious issue in our community in general, and I really do think to a certain extent it's beyond our control.
So I put myself in the queue, and then we will proceed on. I have found myself kind of finding pros and cons to both leaving it where it is as well as moving it to the end, and just kind of resign myself to I'm going to do whatever the majority of the board decides. I don't have a strong enough feeling one way or another, but two things that I do think that we could do, actually go back to moving it later in the evening. That's an inconvenience. We're not silencing anyone. We inconvenience ourselves all the time for the benefit of the public through our service. I don't think it's an unreasonable inconvenience to expect us to get through our work before we go through an hour of public abuse, because that's currently what public testimony is turning into. It's a audible version of a Facebook comment section. and it's not very productive. But what I do think, and having listened to testimony at the assembly meeting and other places, and talking to the Anchorage School Board, who also experienced this a few years ago, where it got pretty bad, two things that they implemented were having a protected spot where if students sign up to testify, we move them to the top of the list. So they are the first ones to go. So then they can also leave or go other places. And if they don't show up, that's fine, but that comes out of that hour. And the other part was, and this was mentioned many times at the assembly meeting too, is board members not asking any questions. It is, you get to talk to us. If you want to follow up or something, then send an email, find that person's phone number, but questions, and we do a pretty good job of not turning it into grilling, but I've been an audience member who came and that was not the truth. It felt like you were on a witness stand. It's not a good practice, and it can be abused. And so not having the ability to ask questions, I think, protects us. And it means we get through the testimony. We had Ms. Burnett, then Mr. Doran, and if I forgot somebody, you remind me.
I would support that, especially moving the students to the top, let them go first. I would be in favor of not asking questions, get them in and out. I just, again, strongly feel against moving it, but I do agree with students at the top and what we can do to protect them 100%.
Mr. Doran.
Range of things, and I think this conversation, I guess I'll start there as I appreciate that this conversation was brought to the whole board to have. I do think that in my appreciation for that is that this would be such a substantive change to our meetings that I think it is a more board decision than a president's decision. President's decision is ordering the general agenda items and those types of things, but this is a much more substantive thing, and so I appreciate the conversation. I think it's, as we've gone through it too, we have to problem solve it. There are issues. There are some people who have abused it. There are some people that when I look at one of the things that we state in information for people, that reminds them that we won't deal with personnel issues. And those have been taken care of for the most part, but for years that would be a real issue. It was like, listen to see whether your name comes up and then once it's out there, even though it's personnel, we can't, as a board, they can't do anything that it goes. So I think the problem solving things of this, I've been very encouraged by the increase in calls for civility from throughout the community. Even the editorial from the News Miner was very significant with that. I do think in terms of individuals need to be more conscientious about how they say things and respectful of the broader community and individuals. I also want to state that I think our board decorum has really worked. And there's been a real effort from the board, from several boards since we adopted our norms, et cetera, to change our decorum to each other. And I've seen that. I think the assembly has worked hard to try on the decorum between each other. Years ago, you could sit at assembly and you could watch assembly members, they were poking other assembly just to get a reaction. They knew they could do it, and they did. For the most part, that has gone away, and I think the decorums that are there, they're decorums for ourselves. And I think the cautions that, you know, we're not grilling somebody when they come up, as we've gotten better at avoiding that, as well as just giving more time to speak. We want to, it is clarifications. I think we've tried to do that, clarifying questions. And I think our various presidents have done a good job in trying to say, is that question or, you know, clarification what it is. So those are just more observations with it. And, you know, I keep thinking back, okay, what happens when you have this type of situation problem? Because, you know, within a school, within a business, within, you know, how do you start dealing it? And I don't want a small group, and I shouldn't just say a small group. I don't want a group to take away from what many others have to offer, because we've gotten a lot of good information, constructive feedback, things that do inform our discussions, whether they're in the general non-agenda part of our meeting for testimony or during agendas, that the same types of piece, we want to make sure that we do not lose those voices and let a certain few, people silence others. So,
Mr. Burgess.
I just wanted to quickly thank Mr. Doran for the reminder that we have heard people raising their voices in support of more civility. I misspoke when I said people are not showing up. I think that, but unfortunately, I do think that sometimes it takes something big like this to motivate people to show up. And I want to remind any of the public who may be listening that we need you all the time, please. You know, I don't like this divisiveness that keeps happening in our community. We need to show and model a better path forward. So, but again, thank you, Mr. Doran, for the reminder that people are speaking up. It's actually helped me get through this past week in a lot of big ways.
Circling back, are board members supportive of having student testimony come first?
Yes.
I'm not seeing any objection. Are we okay with trying to make that type of move tonight? I can see if Ms. Richardson, we can just implement asking if it's a student, if they've signed up in advance.
For the most part, it's been all adult, so I don't have any students signed up for tomorrow evening.
Yep. Something that Anchorage said was that they started out slow, but now they have a steady, with that protected time, group of students who is showing up, and teachers become aware and gives them that opportunity to do that. Mr. Doran.
I have no problem in giving students, prioritizing students. I'm not sure about the term protective time. I don't know what they do with that, how they protect. But I think it's the same idea is that they would get priority. If they sign up early, they go to the top of the list, which I think recognizes that if their activities, homework, whatever it might be, that may help that. I would like to, and I think this is also probably in your thinking, but that if a student couldn't be here at 6 o'clock, and as we've done in practice, we'll call somebody, and if they're not online or right there, right then, we'll try and, if there's time, we'll go back to them, but certainly that if a student comes in later, they get it. That if there's time, we can pick them up, et cetera, but giving them priority, I have no particular issue on that.
Okay, I agree. Stay student focused. The other piece, do board members have a feeling one way or another about eliminating our ability to ask questions for clarifying purposes? Mr. Doran.
I do have a concern. I think we've done quite well, and I think our various presiding officers have done pretty well to try and keep it to clarification. Most of the time, we don't ask questions, but I think there can be times to ask a question, because there are times when you really don't know. And I'm thinking people sometimes testify and you don't really know whether they're for it or against what they're testifying on. You know, those are real, and I've watched that at assemblies and here and in different places. So I think having the ability to do it, but being very conscientious about when and really that question, is it a necessary question? So
Think that it adds an extra piece of having to make a president police a board, which is not always a comfortable thing to do. And board members do not like it when presidents say, hey, is that a question, or call something out of line. I do know that it came from multiple public members to the assembly that it was something that perhaps they should do. We have not been doing it as much, but even in our last board meeting, there were some questions that could have been perceived as a little adversarial. And it might just be better if we remove the temptation altogether, and it makes us be our better selves, because we do not have the option. Ms. Maple,
Is this just in non-agenda items?
that would be my
Yeah,
suggestion.
I don't have an opposition. I think specifically to what Mr. Dorn said, there are times where people are giving testimony, and I genuinely don't know if they're pro or against. And if it's an agenda item, I do need to know. I want to have the flexibility to ask. But in non-agenda item questions, I think I can. There's nothing pressing. There's nothing imminent. And if it's unclear, I could follow up in a different way.
Okay. We're going to try it. We'll see how it goes. And we can circle back if we all really hate it. Circle back. I'm sorry. All right. That concludes everything that was on our work session. Oh, sorry, Miss Anderson.
So in light, my understanding is that when they're testifying, if we have a question, we're gonna engage them more.
In non-agenda items, it would be that we're not going to ask questions. We're just going to let them testify and then move to the next. So I would call their name, they would testify, I would say, thank you for your testimony. But in any other agenda item, we would ask clarifying questions. And we ask more of those anyways, because we're trying to make a decision that night.
In the past, sometimes some of the questions have come across as that we're interrogating. I think there's a fine line. I am of the opinion that this is a platform. People have the right to speak. We might not like what they say. We can try to put balances and checks. Let them say what they're going to say within reason, hopefully keeping things moving forward. I personally, I've admired a few people on our board who've been able to ask a question in such a way that it didn't come across to be antagonistic. It was just thoughtfully phrased. I'm too emotionally caught up when stuff is going on, and I don't have that tact. So I choose not to do that and just let people, make their presentation. And then, if we do get that clarifying, I just come from this place that it's just getting rough. I don't know, but yeah, I just let us be real cautious about engaging in any dialogue back and forth. Make sure that your question is specifically for clarification of something that they said. Because when we ask that clarification question, it basically gives them another few minutes to keep going and it may not be a healthy direction. So that's why, I just hesitate to do that. But that's my own opinion, my own thoughts on it. That's all I'm sharing.
Are you in support of not having questions during non-agenda items? Okay. Mr. Doran?
Just related, not specific, but I want to say that I really appreciate that in the superintendent's report, where there have been some very specific informational things. It's nice to have that addressed where it can be done quickly. I mean, sometimes you need more, thought time or whatever. And I do really appreciate Dr. Meinert's piece that I think you've handled those well. Just the information and not getting into a debate. But and I think that at the last meeting, also in the president's report, it was appropriate there rather than superintendent. You also made just an informational point, and so I think that I would just. It's not asking questions, so but I think sometimes that just straight information, and again, caution, thought about it is important, so it isn't a debatable or this is my opinion type of thing. But I think especially when I've seen, I know Dr. Miner, you've done that several times in the superintendent report, and I think that's helpful for people right away to know.
Would board members like to also have a practice where after the non-agenda items, we take like a 5-minute recess? So if you did want to follow up with somebody, they would likely still be in the room. And then also if you're stressed out, you can take a break in the back. And I'll just make it, hey, we're going to take a 5-minute recess every time after public testimony. And by 5, it's usually 7 to 8, let's be real. I try, but we never get there. Mr. Burgess.
I would be in support of that. And I also wanted to say, yeah, I agree on not questioning the public on non-agenda items. I do think having the ability to question when it's an agenda item that we're going to be voting on is important, as Mr. Doran pointed out. But for non-agenda items, I'm in support of what other members have said.
Mr. Doran.
My concern regarding the break is we go on the air at 7 o'clock, and it would be awkward to come on the air in dead time. KUAC fills the music. So I think it's more of maybe an as needs. I know I like the assembly, they go until 6:50 and then they do take a break in their agenda and then come on the air at 7 o'clock. They come back. Sometimes they don't because they want to get other things done and move along. But I am concerned about setting it up as a standard. Yes, we're going to take a 5-minute break after. I would just be concerned when it hits, if it hits at that 7 o'clock time, that we are on the air, ready, in process.
Ms. Burnett.
So, as kind of an expert in this field, they can backfill with some music while we are off the air. While we're on our recess, we can communicate with the production managers and such over there at KUAC so that they are aware that our board will be taking a brief recess. They can have music prepared and ready for on the air. That way, they'll be monitoring us, so they'll know when we come back, they can dim the music and then put us live. It truly is just a phone call to let them know that, hey, this is what's happening. And they usually have got producers. They should anyway have producers and such. They're available, ready to backfill in those cases.
Mr. Doran.
Right. And as I noted, they do that and they do a very good job with it. So fully supportive of what you were saying, except that since that is our coming on time, it is, we're not like the assembly. The assembly actually starts the roll call and their meeting, et cetera, at 7 o'clock. But still, most people are thinking we're coming on there at 7 o'clock. For most of the listening they want to hear. But to your point, yes, KUSC does a great job in backfilling, and they always have music, and they always say what they know and keep people informed. But I'm just saying that when people turn on expecting to hear us, that they should hear us, even though we're in process.
Ms. Maple.
I was just we don't actually get, while our public testimony is limited to an hour, we don't ever finish public testimony by 7 to start business then, because of the pledge and whatever we go over at the beginning, presentations, awards. I don't know that unless public testimony didn't take an hour, I don't know that we've ever started right at 7, much to all of our dismay.
7:20, 7:30.
Okay, that has finished the things on our agenda. Without objection, we are adjourned. And we will give everybody a minute or so, and then we will move into the special meeting, which will go into an executive session. We are adjourned.
Are we going to the diocese? Are we going up there or staying here?